guitars and the instruments while we go through our PowerPoint for all of the visual learners, especially. The PowerPoint is very important. So we all played our instruments, and I wanted to ask this with Michael. It really was. So anyway, but we are using our learning styles all the time, even when we're performing and playing instruments. The goal of this presentation is that we're going to talk about the 4 main learning styles, and then we will do a self-assessment, and then we'll share information with our colleagues and with one another in regards to teaching strategies, which are very important because we have every generation, there's a focal point of how information is shared and obtained, from the madrigal singers, the troubadours, all the way to the newspaper, and now we've got technology. And so we're getting information very rapidly nowadays in many different ways, and that's affecting our children, from our youngest little Suzuki students and early childhood students, all the way up through our learning through music, in our giving voice choir. How is music learning happening? And so we have such a wonderful wide range of diversity in learning at McPhail, and so we really felt this was an important information to share with you. So first of all, our quote of the day is, "You must learn a new way to think before you can master a new way to be." And so again, a new way to think before you can master a new way to be. And so now the 4 main learning styles. And you maybe have heard some of this information before, and if you have a comment, please raise your hand, okay? Because I know you're all masters at your own work, and some of you have been teaching much longer than I have, and that's what's great about our colleagues. I really, share your information. Auditory learning. Many people assume that we as musicians are great auditory learners. And what's great about our 12 cranial nerves in our brains, the more we use different senses, the more we're building synapses and learning highways. And so I think we really, as musicians, help enhance auditory learning, like through our Suzuki listening program, through music therapy, through the music that we use. We're really helping people become better listeners. And being a better listener is just a better thing for society. So let's hear it for our musicians. Anyway, auditory learning. We learn best through dialogue, through listening. Even when we're reading directions, we might read the directions out loud because we need to hear it. Auditory learners, we like repetition. And our study techniques are such as like with the treble, clef, we're looking at FACE and Every Good Boy Does Fine. We use those sorts of acronyms to help us with learning. That's an auditory learner. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to share about auditory learning? Very important. All right, then we get to our kinesthetic learning. Our kinesthetic learners are students who are hands-on learners. They learn best. Watch what I'm doing, see what I'm doing, and I can do it too. They really understand information through tactile representation, like someone who is blind reads through Braille. They have a real sense, their sensories are enhanced with their kinesthetic senses. And I think one of the greatest kinds of musicians who are real pros at kinesthetic learning are conductors, because they are moving. They are moving, they're watching, their bodies are moving, they're using all sorts of information to put people together. Those are kinesthetic learners. So they're very important people. Every domain is very important. Then we've got our visual learners. And our visual learners like graphics, and they like art, and they like colors, and they're interested with mapping and with graphs. And because of technology, more and more of our little people are becoming more and more visually acute. And so we really need to think about that in our teaching. Maybe we're going to need to use technology in a new way when we teach. Maybe we're going to need to use different visual prompts to help our youngest children be a little more successful, because that's how they're really processing information. And then finally, read and write. Read and write was probably people who are my generation and older, or around my generation, baby boomers, that's their strongest areas, read or write. Reader writers are people that listen and then they take copious notes. It helps them to remember. They make lists of things, lists upon lists upon lists so they can remember. They're also musicians that look at the notes, okay, and then they play. So that's reading and writing too. So reading and writing, again, through music. And what's great about music is music uses your entire brain when you're doing a musical activity. And so you can help enhance learning. Let's say a child is very, very visual. Let's enhance reading and writing through music. Let's enhance listening through music. Let's enhance the kinesthetic movement through music. So what's great about music is it can enhance all four main learning styles. That's very, very exciting. So anyone have any input on the four learning styles or would like to share any information they have about it? Yes, Carla.
Well, just something I was thinking about when you were talking about in general. Something I've noticed in this last year, and I don't know if that's also a sign of the times with, you know, the way students are picking things up by a computer and things, but I've noticed more like my students actually commenting to me on how they receive their information or what, you know, how, like, I'm really good when I hear this, or I like seeing pictures, you know, like I've had students verbalize a little bit more like that kind of connection of how they learn the best or like where they feel like they're strongest. Like when I hear something, I can play it back, you know. And so I just had students maybe be more verbal about those kinds of things with me lately. I don't know if anybody else has experienced that, like, you know, more recently.
Right. And then what really enhances the four main learning styles is also if you're right-handed or you're left-handed. And I know we've heard in psychology a lot about left brain, right brain. If you're right-handed, you're probably using a higher quantity of your left brain strengths, which include logic, analysis, computation, mathematics, facts. With music, it would be the words in the song and the computation. With the right, if you're left-handed, your right brain is really triggered to be a visionary person, to be creative, imaginative. Not that we don't use that side of the brain. And that's what's great about playing instruments. We're using both sides of our brains all the time. When you're playing a violin, when you're playing the piano, when you're playing the guitar. And what I'm really excited about, well, I thought this was interesting. I went to my eye doctor and I assumed I was right eye dominant because I'm right-handed. No, I'm left, and I would never have assumed that, but I did a test. And I think it's because of all the years I played violin and guitar. My left eye is much more dominant. So that really proves you can retrain yourself in how your brain works through playing instruments. So that is yes.
I kind of think that perhaps these different styles of learning can change with age.
Yes.
I found so many of my youngest students really well visual and auditory. And I mean kinesthetic too, but the reading and writing doesn't seem to come into a little bit later until they actually know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So
and understand that concept.
it all seems to change. Even in my own life, I've noticed these different spots in different times in my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's true. And I also think our society shapes us, our culture shapes us. Different cultures have different emphases on different learning patterns. Some cultures it's much more rote learning. Some cultures it's much more experiential in your learning. And so, but we're just kind of introducing you to these four learning styles and thinking about them and how, again, through music, you can really, you've got a great tool there for teaching. All right, and now we talked about the brain and our eyes. Our eyes tell the story. If you're a visual learner, you're probably going to, oh, I'm thinking about this. Your eye's going to go up to the right side or the left side if you are doing computation. If you're an auditory learner, your eyes usually stay connected with your ear because your eyes are kind of focusing in with the sound. And so you, like an auditory learner, will be thinking, I wonder what that melody would sound like with the flute. Or the auditory recall. You're thinking in music. How many of you think in music? I know I do. Kinesthetic are looking more at their feet, more at their hands, more globally. And again, that's why I think with musicians, I think about conductors. But you know, athletes or doing any sort of sport really does train you to be more of a kinesthetic. We talk also about feeling, emotion, and touch with kinesthetic. And your brain, the kinesthetic areas of your brain are closely connected to olfactory and gustatory, your smell and your taste. And so those senses are more heightened in a person who has a preference for the kinesthetic learning style. And then, you know, the visual recall, you might think in pictures. In fact, there's a very famous book called Thinking in Pictures by Temple Grandin. And Temple Grandin is a very successful, internationally known woman who has autism. And she does design specific stations for animals. And she is an incredibly gifted engineer, but she thinks in pictures. So we all have different patterns on how we think. And what's wonderful, again, with music, we're using kinesthetic, as you know, the auditory, visual construct, we're using all of these. But the eyes, when you're just talking with someone, you might notice their eyes are moving up, or they're very focused, or they're moving down. It's some of their learning styles coming out. So, any other questions or thoughts about that? All right. Well, thank you. It's always fascinating to talk about learning styles, and Nick Johnson is here now to talk more about words.
So listen up. I'd like to take a few minutes to look at some of these concepts and how words can connect to learning styles, and it really stinks when you don't understand these things. As we were starting to talk about this program, we spent quite a bit of time just thinking about the ways that the words that we use can really inform the learning styles that we have the most strength in, and it can also help us to target the learning styles of our students and the people that we're interacting with. One example that I got a kick out of was thinking about the different ways that our presidents talk to us. Right? Mr. Obama, look, listen, read my lips, no new taxes. Right, so the language that we use really does impact the way that people respond to the techniques that we're using to teach, and also to the ways that they're going to be able to respond to the concepts that you're bringing in. And it's important to make sure that when you're using the language, it really is reinforcing what you're after. I can feel your pain. So when you think of an auditory learner, besides listen, what other things would you focus on as far as language? What words do you use to target those auditory learners? Anybody got anything besides listen?
The level, the volume you speak at to them.
I hear what you're saying. Right? Validating the learning styles that the people are bringing to your classroom. What about for a visual learner? What things are you going to be focusing on other than look? How are you going to be able to talk about music and for a visual learner?
Observe or notice.
Yeah. Anything else? Pictures in your mind? Yeah. Can you see what this might sound like? I mean, and these are all things that your students are kind of processing through. One of the things that I wanted to mention, you know, I have lots of hats I wear here. I'm a music therapist. I work in the Music for Life department as well as working in the Sing, Play, Learn. So I get the full span of life. My youngest student right now is 6 weeks old, and my oldest is 104.
Wow.
Yeah, and you know, these learning styles, like you were talking about, do change over time, and they also are going to change with changes in their abilities. So when I'm working with older adults who might be hard of hearing, I'm going to probably avoid saying, hey, listen. And I'm going to really try to find ways that I'm going to be able to target their learning through the movements that I make, through the activities that I'm doing, rather than having to have them hear everything. You know, and when you're working with larger groups, you have to target all of these learning styles. So what things can we do in our classroom to make sure that we're targeting the kids who really are focusing on reading and writing, as well as the kids who need to move? What do you do in your studios, in your classrooms, to be able to achieve some of these goals?
Do a mix of types of activities, so do some action kind of songs or something like that, but then also maybe do if they're of an age where they can even recognize simple pictures, whatever, maybe do something with, they, use a marker or a pen or something.
Yeah. And any of you who are familiar with the Sing, Play, Learn curriculum or the Music for Life curriculum will know that these are built in to the teaching that we do here at McPhail. The early childhood will always have a hands-on activity of some kind. There's always a movement. There's always something visual. We usually have a book that we're going to focus on. So we really have to focus on all of these things to make sure that we're targeting the whole student. This morning, I actually took a learning styles questionnaire, and I'd like each of you to do one of these today. And it was really interesting for me because as a musician, I of course expected that my scores were going to come out, oh yeah, Nick, you're an auditory learner. I'm not. After taking this questionnaire, I found that I am more of a reading and writing and kinesthetic learner, and actually visual was my lowest, and auditory was the second lowest. So to take this quiz, what you're going to do is go through and answer each of the questions, circle them, and then on the last page, you'll take and pair up your answers with the columns, with the rows for each one of these questions. After you're done, tally the total number of letters down there at the bottom and see what kind of learner you are. So if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to ask. From here, we're going to divide out into groups. We're going to talk a little bit about ways that you can identify learning styles in your students, and also ways that you can target them in your work.
Okay.
It should only take about 5 minutes to do the test, so it's pretty quick.
So you want us to do the questionnaire right now?
Yep, if you can do that, see if you notice that you're what you expected or something different.
But what if it's all of the above?
It does say that you can circle more than one. Yep, but try to pick the ones that are most applicable to you. It's going to help to kind of keep your numbers more more relevant, I think.
And if it doesn't take you too long, you can also share with a friend, so.
Certainly can take a different tally on the last sheet. Okay. Sounds like we might be getting some results coming up. Any surprises?
And I was just laughing at.
Oh, the question.
15.
Forget about that.
Well, you go back to see what you circled, and then you put that.
Question one.
Oh, great.
Does that change your opinion? I find that
Is almost done with the test?
and the only people
Who does? Okay.
Well, and then I raised the statistics
I didn't know it. Mine has two. I think it does, I think it's right. Sometimes because of things that happen to you physically,
You getting finished up, folks?
and you have to, you know.
What's that?
It's like, after I went to the trouble of doing a question bank.
You know what, I was surprised. What I thought is that the directions should have said, read all the questions before you start answering. That, yeah, because then we would have figured out if you might have done a read right.
Exactly.
Yeah. How many of you folks came out to be visual learners? Not that far yet? How many of you folks are still working?
Okay.
All right,
Couple, just one in.
yeah, finish up. Chop, chop, folks.
We'll hear a little more music here for Cinco de Mayo.
That's why I think the directions should have had, read all the directions before you start answering, because then you would have not answered number one in the first place. Now, while assessments like these are by no means an end-all, be-all, and it's just kind of a nice way to get a little bit of an idea of what learning styles might be most prevalent for you. Anybody find any surprises there?
Not really.
Go ahead.
I totally thought I was a visual learner, but I have almost all of them were audio.
Interesting.
I found out I was much more strongly kinesthetic than I would have assumed for myself too. I would have thought, I definitely figured reading and writing pretty strong because I'm connected to that too, but I thought I would have more of the visual or audio in there than movement.
I had a similar response, yeah.
I thought I was more balanced.
Did I
All right, well, just out of curiosity, raise your hand for your highest score for visual learners. Anybody? Auditory? Kinesthetic? Read, write? Pretty well balanced group. That's interesting. So
Everything.
all of them,
Read, write, and consider.
pretty well balanced.
Read, write, kinesthetic.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to take a few minutes now. We'll break up into your table groups and your corner group over there. And we'd like you to really work on two things. First, find some ways that you can identify the learning styles of your students in your work. So whether you're in a large classroom setting, individual setting, I mean, there has to be some techniques that you use to figure out how your students are learning. And then think about some strategies that you can use to target each one of these different learning styles. We don't have a whole lot of time, so you might want to focus in on just one or two within your groups. And Diana's going to come around with some blue cords for you to fill them out.
Yeah, if you can take a scribe at your table, so somebody that's gonna take notes. And we have, you can decide which one, maybe it's the read and write people. There is a list of each type of learner. We want you to identify target learning styles and strategies. And then at the end, as a group, decide one that you want to share of each of those answers. Instructions are on there. You've got pencils in front of you. And we're going to give you about 10 to 12 minutes to do this. You've got lots of time. You guys want to join this table or another table? I don't know which one of you wants to do this. Right there. All right. And then when you're all done, we're going to share, so stick around.
Yeah, I agree. I switched kind of, I mean, I do have a certain number of people that come for my biology children, but for beginner classes, I switched the book that I'm using. And kind of tried something that was a little different than like my normal style. I found that that's been really cool, like even just from the get-go, movement to a beat in different ways, and playing, and it just gets them going. You know, I've really found that seems to be a great way that, you know, before they even touch the instrument or we even do the parts and all that kind of stuff.
And then I have how they do there, whether they're or whether they're ready to tell what they're
Interesting, so like numbers.
or whether they're going to feel like they're starting, whether they're, you know, going by themselves. Sometimes I use whether it's aesthetic, whether they don't take so I don't get
I just try to mix up every time.
Probably a lot of singing or listening. Yeah, like troubleshooting, trial and error, you know. I would have to say I couldn't tell you necessarily with most of my students, I couldn't identify their ways they're better than others. I mean, I'd like to feel like some of that we kind of do instinctively because we do exactly what you do. Like when you realize something isn't around and you try something from a different angle. Right. And now that we all have the computers and things that draw pictures, clapping, body percussion, or I do or might be an order on feel successful doing something can't do right.
So that's kind of visual, like you put those post-its up and then you take them away one at a time as they.
Sometimes they have So it's a little bit of everything. Yeah, that's what it is. They also really like decide which pieces they're going to use. Sometimes that gets hard to make more relaxed. They just put this, or we have it in an art style. Where you just do
No, I just memorized it. It's so good, but it confuses me. I can't do the threes, that dotted thing. I have to spend some time learning the one word. But it is. But I love that idea. Because I want to
You ever do that and they say you pick the word? Yeah, and then you do it.
But I always have that.
I think maybe read and write would be something like I do. I found this that some of the like theory books that I really like, I make sure I have some of those things more a little bit like combines kind of the visual and the writing a lot because there's a lot of music math kind of things.
I feel like that back.
Sometimes talking, yeah, I really like because it incorporates a lot of the different things. Like you copy a picture, they'll show it, and then you draw 3 more kind of thing. But then also once you start learning concepts, you know, musical math or nursery and that kind of thing too, like there's a quarter plus a half note. They'll ask you to either write a note or rest that's the equivalent or the number sometimes. So she does it with, you know, with either just the symbols and also the numbers.
It's their turn.
Both the visual parts and then also the comprehension with the writing and knowing something. So yeah, I think it's
I'm gonna give you guys a 5-minute warning for the leave here, so then be ready to share something.
What do we have to explain that?
and I think wouldn't like using blocks or body percussion, wouldn't that also be, that's a kinesthetic, but also sometimes a visual. Of course, an obvious one that I do is something on YouTube or something, so you can watch and listen, you know, a performer from the thing, or you demonstrating something for them. I know, it's hard to I have a hard time separating like one category with this one. You can't do that.
I just like to train them first how to say that. Like scream it, but have to be strong.
Well, that's how you train their.
That's not her thing, because then she plays the keys and then she'll learn the wrong note or sharp or something. And they love it, and then they're listening to it very obvious too. I think I did some of my students. For a warm-up activity.
I think we kind of incorporated that.
You say yeah, no, she's
Well, what I do.
Wrong, really wrong.
I point out what the right way is, and I play the correct one, and they have to play the wrong one. So that they can hear the difference. It's both kinesthetic, part, of course, and then
I think one way of using like say a CD is like you have them experience what is going to be happening and then you describe something, say an activity or whether it's either listening while they're watching something or just or if you have an activity or a movement that they are going to do
it. And I don't get them on the bench. I don't do anything.
Different things that way. I notice even just keeping up with I'm just going to say everything we suggested is off the instrument.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Simple structure that place where your arms out and that way it's one of the
Put that down, really. Like while they're seated, do something. Yeah, I never thought. I always think, oh, I should let them get down or something. Yeah, I do do that. Well, yeah.
Yeah. Because he's like just said he made a total shift in the way he teaches rhythm too, where it's experiential. And I was just like, oh, I'm not in a place where I'm ready to completely flip everything that I'm doing, but I totally understand that it goes along with what you're saying, you know, that you learn by the experiencing of that and the feel of it in your body, and then, you know, you're not looking at it on the page, you're not seeing all the symbols right away, but they've already like learned and integrated it into their understanding, and then, you know, at a certain point, you put it on the page.
Which one are you?
Yeah, I think my elementary music teacher was the reason why I was a musician. He was amazing. He made music so much fun. I'm like, you know, that thought didn't occur to me until probably I was in college or whatever, and I went all the way back to him. But he was amazing.
Oh, you didn't? Oh, yeah. Wow. You know what you are. It's good to know you are. It's just like marriage, yes.
I can see that for my own nieces how early they were entertained by, you know, being in front of a screen.
I thought it'd be more visual. I didn't know reading and writing was different than visual. Yeah, I didn't know. But that's not the best way to teach. I'd like to make a list for the students. Here, just do this and you'll be good.
Well,
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
I have a hard time separating it.
Yesterday I said to my students,
Just trying to incorporate different things, you know, as often as I can.
I'll write it again though, now that I told you. It's like, wow, well, what is making sense? And his dad's like, she writes her every week. Write it again, so he did this 10 years. So maybe he's not a he's definitely not a reader, right? He's 14. He's brilliant, but he doesn't. I don't know what he does. Maybe I should, because we're really learning to make that.
How we doing, folks?
What? Yeah, you can
Alright. Scribes. We guys meet for each table? Go ahead.
Well, I didn't mean to go first. I was just identifying myself as a scribe.
Somebody's got to do it.
Let's get up.
No?
Okay, at our table, we realized that we don't necessarily identify things quickly. We did say, like, one example of how we do eventually identify a learning style is because I think we do, as you've said, we do so many all the time. And you can see what gets responded to and what needs to get done more. Joy was making the point that she often will deliberately do more of what she doesn't see, just to develop it, even if, you know, especially when the parent comes in and says, well, my student does this learning best, and so teach them that way. And Joy's like, we'll just fix that.
Like you say, teaching to the whole person, make sure that we're building up the skills where they might be the weakest. Yeah.
So I was, one example of, for example, identifying a kinesthetic learner is that I like to have my students stand right in front of me and take a ride on my left hand with their violin hand, and then they can feel what is supposed to happen. And if they already know what's supposed to happen, I can tell that they're doing it for me. They can move my fingers for me. If it's not comfortable, then I know I want to develop that more, and then I'm going to try it a couple other ways. And then, do I do the bottom half too? Sure. Okay, so a teaching strategy that Michael shared in terms of working with kinesthetic learners is that, or a kinesthetic way he teaches, is that he relies a lot on muscle memory when he's working on shifting. If there's a certain particular distance that they need to accomplish, there are different physical landmarks that he was remarking about. How'd I do it? Okay, good.
Fantastic. I would add that, pairing those physical movements along with the auditory input, particularly on these string family instruments, when you gotta get your finger in exactly the right spot, you're gonna hear it too. And so, being able to combine these learning styles through your teaching techniques is really important. I'm gonna go over here.
So we went off on a just fun tangent. But actually, we talked a lot about what you guys were too, is that we find that we try to teach students, even if they excel in one way, we're trying to teach all of those different styles because each of those are different aspects of music that we want our students to develop. And so I think you guys said the same thing, is if we see that a student is deficient in one area, that's probably where we're going to focus first.
Well, what techniques do you use to identify which learning area they might be deficient in?
To be honest, trial and error. So you try one thing and it doesn't work, so then you try another and then you start to see patterns. So there's nothing fancy for like trying to assess or whatever, it's just over time what do you see coming out,
So a question for the group, we all teach in different settings here at McPhail. I do a lot of large group settings, and I have very few when I'm doing individuals. So how would you approach these in those two different settings? There are different techniques that you would use if you were working with 20 people or with an ensemble as opposed to if you were working with just an individual?
And so we talked just a little bit about that when it's in a large group, is that you just, when you're planning your lesson, that you try to make sure that you have activities that hit all those different things. So if you're introducing a new concept, making sure that the students get to experience it in all those different ways throughout the course of the class. That way, someone will be able to grasp onto it at some point during the class.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, we kind of did the same thing, except that when we were talking about the visual thing, we were thinking that for visual learners, maybe Lego blocks would be a good demonstration for lengths, for rhythms, larger or longer blocks for longer rhythms and shorter for the other. Auditory would be lyrics, and then troubleshooting for the best style. So what I was saying is that, the basic 4/16 and 2/8, some people some kids will assimilate taka 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 taka. Some people will say Mississippi River. Some people will just have to say 1, 2, 3, 4, stop, stop, because they cannot.
They respond to different types of words.
They can't coordinate the syllable with the action, but they can with the number. So we do troubleshooting all the time. So in kinesthetic, we said, well, you use claves and clapping and tapping and
Like percussion instruments, body percussion type thing.
and read and write, maybe copying a picture and using some musical math when they get a little bit older, so they can, be able to add and subtract those things. So one of the things we said, pick one successful idea shared or identifying different learning styles, and then we all agree that Sue Ruby's dance rhythms have to be practiced because they're kind of hard, so we feel a little bit uncoordinated on that one.
She's supposed to be here too.
Fantastic. Come over here.
There's a lunch with her name on it.
So we said,
Where is she? She knew you were gonna say that.
trial and error for everything. Really just kind of have to do that.
Can you give us a couple of concrete examples of what you would use for your trial and error?
Yeah, well, one thing is trying to incorporate all the styles in every lesson. I try and do that because you might find, and personally, I'm a bit embarrassed that I didn't realize that one of my students in a group lesson is very visual, and he's been struggling all year, and I just realized recently, well, if I write down the fingering or something, he gets it, and because it's a group setting, I wasn't doing that, because they're not yet reading notes, and so I was just trying to do all these different other ways of clapping and counting and singing and everything, but really he needs them written down. So I realized that I should have realized that long ago. But for a lot of these things, we talked about showing YouTube video performing for them, for visual, or different apps that have like guessing the notes and reading notes and flashcards. For auditory, we said playing for them, having them clap rhythms or clap back and counting. I guess that's also kind of kinesthetic. And we have finger in our midst, so she said, talked about like doing a gesture for attention or feeling the concept to help that. And then reading and writing on the whiteboard. I do that every lesson, especially group lessons, and I'll write fingerings, I'll even draw out the staff, and I think that's a big help in learning. Just kind of incorporating everything all the time.
Yes, yeah, we haven't talked at all about the technology yet, but really the huge tool, the resource that we have there. I mean, there's all the musical games, and the technology that we have today does target most of the learning styles that we're talking about. I mean, you get out the Wii and it's big movements that you're doing, and all of these things can be applied to our music. Let's go back there.
Pretty much the theme for us with our learning style when we were talking was observation of how the student is when they come in the room and early on in the sessions in order to target their best learning style. We focused a lot about kinesthetic and the learning styles of that. Everyone had a different kinesthetic approach, switching pianos from one to the other, doing finger playing, hand ride, I forgot what else, stretches, different hand positions, open or closed, just observing that and how the student best responds. And then the technique that I think all of us said, oh, that's an interesting idea, was having the student or even the teacher draw pictures on a Post-it and laying out what the session plan is going to be, and then removing that as you go through so that the student has ownership of that as they're going through it.
That's a really common music therapy technique for folks that don't have time transitioning between these activities. It's extremely effective, yeah.
Have you guys met?
No.
Alana, Nick, you're both music
Oh,
therapists.
very nice. All right.
What do you know?
Well, and, you folks are all master teachers. I know that you incorporate all of these ideas into your classrooms and your studios all the time. But I think it's really important for us to be really deliberate about it and kind of bring it to the forefront of your mind to make sure that you really are targeting all of these different learning styles. I know that for me, and I think that for most of us, we'll all fall into our ruts and just kind of do the same thing. And it's important to have routine and pattern in your work, but it's also really important to make sure that you're really addressing the whole student. And I love this idea of really strengthening the weakest learning styles with your students. But I do know that it's so vital to make sure that you are providing education in the learning styles that they're strongest, because we want our students to be successful. We want them to really, be able to power through and make this all fantastic. Does anybody have any last words of wisdom, questions, thoughts, comments on how we can use these ideas of the 4 learning styles in our classrooms? Yeah.
Just like side perspective lessons, sometimes you can be surprised by how much better a student is at visual learning than other styles when you have a stack lesson all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, wow, you got that today. Why didn't you get that when you were in school?
Well, the setting can have so much to do with it, yeah. Go ahead.
At our table, we were discussing in the note reading class that we have in the SLEEK program, which was designed by Faith Farr deliberately with at least 3 learning styles in mind. And the materials provided require the kids to clap, play, and write. And so she was extraordinarily deliberate as she designed a curriculum that's been really, really effective as we've seen our kids develop into a really whole-minded approach to what they're able to do and translates it's super cool.
Yeah, but being deliberate about this stuff can be so incredibly powerful.
And it's really exciting to watch kids from September to May get really fluent.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What if you really have no clue what the learning style of this particular kid is? Do you have any assessment things? I mean, should we give them this little written test or what?
And there are lots and lots of resources available out there. I mean, you all are master Googlers, I'm sure. And there are technology games. I know that both the Apple Store and the Google Play Store have apps that will help to work through some of these things. Depending on the population that you're working with, you're going to have different techniques for everybody. And so, think about who you're working with, and you're masters. You all know how to do this. You just need to harness the skills that you already have, and just make sure that you're being deliberate about what you're doing. Make sure that you're really targeting all of these learning styles. And yeah, anybody else?
I like your encouragement to make sure you do their preferred style so that they feel the success and progress.
Well, I started taking piano lessons when I was 5, and I am an extremely kinesthetic learner. And this woman put music in front of me, and I struggled and struggled and struggled. I hated it. I got a guitar when I was 12, and the guy put a G chord in front of me and said, "Play this." Guitar, that's the thing, and I can play a little piano now, but he was able to figure out that, yeah, this kid is going to be able to learn by seeing it this way instead of giving it notes and say, well, the FAC, I don't want to know that. I want to make music, and a big thing for me was I wanted it to sound really good right away, so if I learned how to grab a G chord, turn up the distortion all the way, and I felt like a rock star, and that was really a 12-year-old kid in the basement. But that was the thing that was really reinforcing for me, and you have to have success in anything that you're working on in order for you to reinforce the idea, well, I should keep on working this because it's going to get better. My daughter was learning how to play the violin and said, "Dad, I just don't like the way that it sounds." She gave up, She's playing other instruments now, but it's really important that we focus on making them successful as well as strengthening their weaknesses. I mean, all of these things are important, and we need to do it all. It's easy, right?
On that note.
Yeah. If a child can't learn the way we teach, maybe we should teach the way they learn. Okay, thank you all so much for your time and attention today.
Do we get a copy of the PowerPoint? Will it be up on the internet maybe?
Yep, we'll get that up for you.